The McKinsey Global Institute recently released a report called, quote, The Next Big Arenas of Competition. This is a whopping 213-page report that explores 18 what they call arenas. These are future areas that could reshape the global economy and generate a staggering amount of revenues by 2040, anywhere from 29 trillion to 48 trillion more in revenue combined by 2040 from these 18 future arenas. They basically define arenas as industries that transform the business landscape and have two core characteristics: high growth and dynamism. One of these arenas is particularly important to us and our listeners. It is AI software and services. And the implications of some of McKinsey's data on the growth in this area are pretty interesting. So, for the purposes of their report, McKinsey defines AI as, quote, a machine's ability to perform cognitive functions that we usually associate with humans. And they kind of include in that both traditional machine learning capabilities, where we're using AI to predict outcomes and behaviors, as well as generative AI applications. Notably, though, they exclude from this kind of arena, this categorization, they exclude hardware like NVIDIA chips. So with all that in mind, here's kind of what McKinsey reports about this arena. First, investors are flocking to companies developing advanced AI, particularly Gen AI. Equity investments in that technology jumped from $5 billion in 2022 to $36 billion in 2023. Developments in analytical AI and Gen AI are poised to drive the industry's growth by improving business and worker productivity. In certain modeled scenarios, the arena's revenues grow from $85 billion in 2022 to $1.5 trillion in a lower range of scenarios in 2040. And that can go up to as high as $4.6 trillion in some of the more optimistic scenarios. That's a compound annual growth rate of anywhere from 17 to 25%. Now, past McKinsey research also kind of analyzed more than 500 uses for analytical and Gen AI and estimated their potential economic impact. One of them, analytical AI, such as machine learning and deep learning, could amount to an estimated 9.4 to 15 trillion in revenues by 2040. Gen AI could produce 2.6 to 4.4 trillion of economic impact through enterprise use cases. McKinsey highlights that 3/4 of that value would be in only 4 areas. Customer operations is number 1, number 2, marketing and sales, number 3 is software engineering, and lastly, R&D. Now, all these enterprise use cases do not even account for all the productivity gains of individual knowledge workers who are automating aspects of their occupations. Incorporating all these cases of individual worker productivity enabled by Gen AI, in addition to the enterprise use cases, could unlock a total of 6.1 trillion to 7.9 trillion of value annually. So if you add all this together, these components together yield an estimated range of total economic potential from AI software and services of 15.5 to 22.9 trillion annually by 2040. Now, that's a lot of numbers. Some of those are like eye-watering. I don't even believe them half the time looking at them. Obviously, Paul, we cannot fully predict this economic impact of AI like 15 years from now. But as you've noted in some of your posts and writing from the past week, it seems safe to assume we are looking at trillions of dollars being invested in and produced by AI in the coming decade. So that certainly seems to me, like reading all this, that despite all the hype in Gen AI and even some of the disillusionment that's already creeping into the market, it sounds like we're just still so early.
Yeah, and it is like the numbers are confusing. And I mean, listening to you say them now, it's like hard to wrap your brain around. I read like the key findings like 5 times just to try and comprehend what they were saying. Like, because it's weird. They mix AI revenue and economic impact.
Yeah.
And then they blend like some new data with a report that they did, I think earlier this year, that had to do with where they analyzed 500 AI use cases. And I was struggling to like interpret what was the new data versus what was the previous thing they were referencing. But I think like to unpack this for people, as you explained, Mike, the key takeaway here is it's huge. It's trillions, and we're just at the start. Um, to try and put it in context, so I went and pulled the latest gross domestic product numbers, GDP numbers for the United States. So the GDP October 30th, 2024 was 29.4 trillion. So again, to put trillions into context, the GDP at the moment is 29.4 trillion, and it's up roughly 5% from the previous year. Now, the GDP is the total value of all goods and services that are produced, in this case, in the United States, within a specific period, which in this case is, an annual basis. It is a key indicator of economic health. And it's also, when you look to the future and you try and say, well, what's the impact of AI going to be? It is one of the key things you would look at and say, well, what's the impact going to be on GDP? Now, I've had this conversation with a few people who are skeptical of AI having like an outsized impact because on average, the GDP is going to grow maybe 2.5% to 3% in a given year. Now, we've had a jump in the previous 12 months, but it's pretty common for it to stay in that range. And so if you have someone show up and say, well, it could be 10% like a year, or in the case of Leopold Aschenbrenner and his situational awareness, he's talking about like 10, 20, 30% per year.
Yeah.
And an annual rate and like compounding over time. And a lot of people just say, there's just no way. There's no historical context to that it's impossible. And so the way that AI could impact GDP, so the economic impact, we'll come back to the revenue, is increased productivity. So we just produce more. We output more services. We can output more tangible products because we have more time to make more things, basically, because AI is assisting us. So we become more efficient. The efficiency enables us to do more productivity. The other area is innovation and new product development. The AI is going to help us identify new markets, new product ideas. It's going to help us drive innovation that creates growth. As the AI does more and more of people's knowledge work jobs, you have the potential to reallocate the labor force. So we have this kind of finite amount of people that can do work in the United States. I don't know how many people we have in the US is like 300 million or something like that. It's like 70.
A little over 300.
And there's about 136 million full-time jobs. So imagine if AI 10 years from now can do 20 to 30% of the cognitive labor of those 100 million people that do knowledge work jobs, and you can redistribute those people to do other things. So now you have the existing GDP from what we are already doing today. You layer AI's ability to do another 20, 30, 40% of that work, and then you redistribute that 20, 30% of work to other things, you're increasing the output. So a reallocation of labor into new roles, new markets, new businesses. You have industry and sector growth. The AI enables growth of different industries. They can produce more. And then you potentially have a boost in consumer demand, which drives the growth of outputs, because you can personalize experiences and products to them.
Right.
And so these are all like fundamental ways, very tangible ways that you can start to make an argument that AI will have a massive economic impact on GDP. Now, I mentioned Leopold, like let's go back real quick to his notes, and we'll put this was from June of 2024, his situational awareness papers. We'll put the link in the show notes again, but a few key excerpts here. He says, and this is one of the things, like, I don't think McKinsey's taken into account AGI and superintelligence. And again, this is one of the big flaws I keep saying we see from researchers and economists is like, they're not considering the future models. They're considering what we know to be true about basically current models. But in Leopold's papers, he's saying we're going to get to superintelligence. And like when we do, we're going to see massive economic growth. So he says we could see economic growth rates of 30% per year and beyond.
Yeah.
Quite possibly doubling each year. This way, and then he does give a caution. This may well be delayed by societal frictions, which I 100% believe to be true. I think it's a large part of why we're not seeing the massive economic impact right now. And he calls out specifically arcane regulation might ensure lawyers and doctors still need to be human, even if an AI system were better at those jobs. Surely sand will be thrown into the gears of rapidly expanding robo-factories as society resists the pace of change. And perhaps we'll want to retain human nannies, all which could slow GDP statistics. Now, a really practical recent example here is we had the East Coast shut down and a strike
Right.
because of the shipping. And it was all over, well, at least in large part, over the future possibility of automating those ports,
Mhm.
which is already being done in other countries. And so this is, could we ship more? Could we receive more if we were automating the ports? Absolutely. Will we be allowed to automate the ports due to whatever regulations or union or whatever it is that slows that down? That will be a barrier to GDP growth, even though the AI could do it. And
Mhm.
so that's an example where, and I'm not saying right or wrong either case, I'm just using it as an example of there's going to be friction, there will be resistance. And then when you get into the AI revenue, Leopold made the point, companies will make large AI investments if they expect economic returns to justify it. He gets into trying to project out like OpenAI and Microsoft's revenue. He said one estimate puts Microsoft at 5 billion in incremental AI revenue already. He said every 10x scale up in AI investment seems to yield the necessary return. So we're already seeing this. Like
Really.
the reason they're putting in 500 million, a billion, 5 billion, 10, whatever it is because their expectation is a return. They're not doing this just out of like hope that it's going to work. They're seeing the results. Leopold then says a key milestone for AI revenue that I like to think about is when will a big tech company, Google, Microsoft, Meta, hit 100 billion revenue run rate from AI specifically? These companies have an on the order of 100 billion to 300 billion of revenue today. A 100 billion from AI alone would be represent a huge opportunity and a big fraction of their business. And then you could start to extrapolate out massive growth. And he's thinking we might get there by 2026 based on current models.
Yeah.
And so he's just pretty much saying like, and then like, I like the example Leopold gives about Microsoft. He said it may seem like a stretch to like be talking about these crazy numbers, which leads us back to the McKinsey study of like trillions. But he said, like, how unrealistic really is it if Microsoft has 350 million paid subscribers to Microsoft Office? And as we think about these reasoning engines and the more advanced models 1 to 2 years out that are basically doing the work of people who are making hundreds of $1,000s a year,
Yeah.
would you as a company be willing to pay $100 a month for that model? Hell yeah. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't talked in depth about this. Yeah, maybe we'll come back to this, but I built a co-CEO GPT. Like I built a strategic partner for myself to run my business. I'm I'm telling you right now, I'd pay $100 a month to have access to this one custom GPT I built. Like
Mm.
it is wild how much value every day I get from this thing as a strategic partner for me to run my companies and like kind of build plans and envision the future. So I think once these tech companies get better at explaining the value of their products in a true value-oriented form, not this assumption that I should only pay $20 a month, but what is the value I'm getting out of this as either a replacement or an augmentation to a strategic consultant or advisor, replacement or augmentation to a full-time employee that's making 150, $200,000 a year. $100 a month is nothing, like
Right.
to be able to get that value exchange. And so once these companies get better at demonstrating that and then get way, way better at onboarding AI literacy, like training and education internally so that the people buying the software are from day one getting value from it, that's where they're all missing the boat right now. But as soon as you do that, we are talking about hundreds of billions and trillions of revenue coming from the companies selling these, but then that trickles down to all the other verticals and industries. So, I mean, at the end of the day, the thing, as you alluded to, like it's impossible to project this accurately
Yeah.
15 years out. It's possible to project this accurately 5 years out. Like I don't even try and do it 5 years out, like two to three, maybe. Um, but it's going to have a massive impact. And the thing we keep coming back to, and if you're a listener to this show, a defaulting to taking action every
Mhm.
day, saying,
Yeah.
how do I get better at this? How do I learn more about AI? How do I infuse it more into what I'm doing? How do I help my company move forward? The people who take action and accelerate their literacy and capabilities have the greatest chance of thriving as we move forward. And the same holds true for businesses. We are in the very, very early innings of this, probably the top of the first inning, to use a baseball analogy, of like adoption and transformation from AI, but it is going to be massive. And so McKinsey studies like this from McKinsey help put in context how massive, but it's all a guessing game. It's big though.
Yeah. Yeah, and we talk about that a lot, that it's probably more important to just be directionally correct. Like whether it's 10 trillion or 100 trillion, honestly, doesn't really matter to your average business leader. But
Correct.
do we know today that double-digit productivity gains are possible across a wide range of knowledge work? Yes, we do. What would that be like 2 years from now? It could be triple-digit gains. I mean, so that's the directional trend.
Correct.
Act accordingly.
Yeah. Yeah. And yes, take action. Do not wait around.